Leadership certainly has changed a lot over the last few years, mainly because the conditions have changed. Now, whether you are preparing for your first or for your next leadership role, we have to rethink how can we actually build rapport, how we can connect in a more hybrid world, but also how can we influence and impact even beyond our role, because this is exactly what's required to make things happen. And the question is, how do we actually do this? How do we prepare for a workforce with 5 generations, where we've got hybrid workforce, not only from a locations perspective, but also having now AI as part of the workforce and a lot more. And this is exactly what we are discussing today. And I couldn't be more excited to be joined by a leadership coach who is specializing in working with leaders on managing change. And this is exactly what we want to discuss. Tony Martignetti is this week's guest, and I'm really excited to dig deep because Tony's background is not necessarily from a coaching or from a leadership perspective initially, but now has specialized in that space. Now, with that said, Tony, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. And I'm always fascinated by people who have landed in a different profession to where they started, because I think this is actually what makes somebody a really strong contestant in this field, because you're bringing different perspectives into a new field. But with that said, give us some background. How did you land to where you are right now?
Yeah, and first of all, I agree with you. I think there's something about like bringing some different perspectives into different fields. In it, you're able to see things fresh eyes. Yeah. So let me start by saying that before I get into the work I'm doing now, I have had a very interesting background, not just working in finance, but also working in biotech, which was an industry that I spent over 25 years working in. And even further back, I was an artist who spent time really immersing myself in the world of art and thought that I would be an architect, but decided to shift gears into following my the idea of going in to become a doctor. And then that became something where I was like, okay, this is not for me. It's time for me to switch in medicine into business. So a lot of I often say that if there was a movie made about my life, it would be the wanderings of a lost wayfinder. Yeah. So finally found my way, but it took a long time to get there. What really brought me to doing this work it was really had to do with the fact that I had spent this time, working with numbers, being this analytical person, but so many people told me like, there's something about you that's different. You see people differently, you see people on a deep level, and you're a great connector and a curator of different insights and things that are out in the world. And I would say, that's great, but I do this job and this is what I'm a finance person. So I do this. And therefore I want to be the most effective finance professional I can be. And then I realized I was burning myself out, that trying to be something that I don't think I was ever meant to be. And I started listening, and that's what brought me to this point where I said, enough is enough. I need to follow my own, wayfinding, if you will, and get into the path that was really meant for me. And that's what brought me to coaching. So yeah.
Beautiful. I love it. And, thanks so much for sharing that, because often people are putting so much pressure on them that their first job is not their dream job or their dream career. And they wonder, what's wrong with me? This is meant to be an exploration. And, also just completely going into different industries, you also see, what do I like from here? What do I not like? And then using that kind of data-driven decision-making process to identify what would be my next step. And how leadership, like, where did you actually start with leadership coaching in the first instance? Because it doesn't just happen either.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it came back about 6 years ago when I decided that, I was sitting in a boardroom actually, and this is the moment that really got me into this path. I was sitting in a boardroom in a biotech company, and I saw the leaders that were showing up in the room. They weren't in it for the right reasons. They wanted to look good without doing good. Ultimately, it was about image preservation and not about doing the right thing for the people around them. Most importantly, making sure people felt like they were motivated towards the right goals. And as I sat there in the room, I looked at everyone checked out, looking at their phones and just feeling disconnected. And so I said to myself in that moment, I said, think this is where I have to take my exit. And I literally got up and I walked out, and I said to myself, I'm going to leave this. I'm going to leave this room to change this room, because there's a different way to lead. And I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to find a way. So I didn't have a plan, but I figured the first thing I would do is start having conversations. And the conversations I had led me down this path of maybe I should look into coaching. And coaching eventually started to become more than just coaching, but more about creating leadership development programs and kind of going into these other paths to create something that was more meaningful for how leaders can show up in the world. So I'm glad I did follow my heart, and I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, which were all great lessons.
Absolutely. And speaking of lessons, from all those conversations that you've had, what have been some of the key takeouts? And then the second part of the question is, how do you define leadership based on all your insights now?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say the key insights that I learned from people were that a lot of people just kind of stay put in their organizations because they're afraid of the discomfort that goes with change. And ultimately, what I've come to realize is that on the other side of that discomfort is an amazing life that's waiting for us. And we just have to get over that initial shock of untethering ourselves from the organizations that we're part of. And so that first thing, there was the conversations I had where, oh, I mean, I had this really toxic boss, but I wouldn't leave because then I would leave all this money on the table. And what would I do if I did leave? Those conversations over and over again had me thinking, well, people just tolerate so much. And that tolerating is not a way to live life. So that was a lot of the lessons I learned, and realizing that there is a lot of toxic leadership out there. So, and how do I define leadership? I mean, I think leadership is about leaving people in a place where they feel like they're better than you found them. Enriching people through your experience of being with them. It's about being a person who sees something in others that they don't see in themselves, and allowing them to reach their potential through that process. So a big part of it, and it doesn't have to be related to religion or anything like that, but believing in people is a great big part of being a leader, and seeing their potential before they do allows them to rise to that occasion when the time comes. And I've seen that again and again in some of the leaders who I truly respect and honor.
And it's such a beautiful explanation, also coming kind of full circle to what you said at the beginning. You felt so disconnected and also drained. And I think when you are in this wrong environment, maybe doing the wrong task because it's not aligned to your strengths, or being with the wrong type of people or the wrong type of environment, it's so draining, and you can only push uphill for so long until you're exhausted and burned out. And if you want to step into a leadership role, you cannot give if your cup is completely empty. So having the self-awareness, what you just mentioned, is the first step to people leadership and actually seeing this potential in others. Now, how do you work now with your clients when we say, I've been doing this job for a while, something is not quite right, I'm not sure what it is?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I do is I do take them through a process of really understanding what got them going in the first place. I think of it as like a time travel, looking at it so they look back, go, travel into the past and say, what got me started? What were the things that had me feeling like this was the right path for me? And why did I enjoy this particular part initially? And then maybe the fire's gone out because something has happened. Maybe it's this environment particularly, or something about the work has just lost its flavor. So the reason why that's important is because sometimes all we need is just a little bit of a change in perspective that can make a big difference in how we show up. And the next part of it is to really look into the future and say, okay, look, now that you've learned a bit about the past, what are some things that you want your future self to really look like? And what do you want that to be? And how can you start to bring some of those elements that you discover in the future, a future self, and bring it into the present? So how can you figure out, well, the leader who I want to be is someone who can, be able to make decisions that are more strategic in nature, really be able to lead a team that is making a big impact in the world, whatever that might look like. And then come to today and say, what can I do now that allows me to step into that? And one of the big ways that I show people to do that is I call it the expand your vision, narrow your focus model, which is to say, now that you've expanded your vision, looked at new possibilities through this time traveling, what can you do to narrow the next step so that you're only focusing on that next step and not being way out there trying to figure out to do all the things that come to mind? Yeah.
I love this approach of looking back and also looking forward, because
Yeah.
often it's just this, oh yeah, this is exactly why I got into it. It may just be the wrong kind of people have joined the team now, and this has changed the dynamics, or I'm just not interested in this topic anymore, or I was never meant to be, or whatever it might be, because I think it also gives people the allowance to change direction. And I'm very curious about your insights on that, but I've seen a lot of, especially executive leaders or very senior leaders, they're so wrapped up with their title and their identity that one is one. So if they were made redundant, or if they would consider leaving, they don't know what else is there, because there's literally them. How do you deal with letting go of something that's so ingrained in you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's important to get people to see that they have multiple identities, not just one. And I think that's why I talk about expansiveness, because I think that's a big part of what I do is get people to see bigger. And that also means seeing the other identities that you can embody. I talked about art earlier, and I see myself as an artist still. And yet, even though I'm not painting and drawing every day or glass blowing, which is another thing I do, it doesn't mean that I'm not an artist and I can own that identity. Just like with the leaders who say, like, well, I define myself as, let's say, the CEO of XYZ company. But you're also a father or a mother, and an adventurer, whatever else you do outside of work. And you also support causes, and those things are part of your identity. And so that's part of how you can get fulfillment in your life. It doesn't just come from that title. It comes from the what you do with the life you have. And so getting them to detach from the title and get into the identities of who you are, that makes a very big difference. And I know it sounds easy. It's not.
Any change is hard at the beginning because you're so comfortable, as you said before, in your being, and you also know exactly what to expect. And we always prefer the predictability over the comfort level, because this is how our brain is wired. So I think it's such an important exercise, though, for all of us to do. I'm not sure if it's the same in the US at the moment, but there are a lot of layoffs and redundancies all over Australia from very large, even government organizations, which hasn't happened in I don't know how many years, and now it is happening. So we have to rethink, what else could I do with my skill set? And then also thinking, AI is now here, it's not going to go anywhere. How can I go away from this title that I've held for so long and rethink what's my value creation that AI or any kind of machine cannot do? And you are specializing in change. What are the biggest challenges that you have seen so far, other than, I don't know what tomorrow looks like or this world could look like?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about all these things, the change is not just about the change itself. It's about the uncertainty of what's on the other side of it that it causes people to be in panic mode. And I think that is really the hardest part. If you try to reject that it's happening, or you try to resist, then it becomes very draining, and it also becomes very emotionally charging. And so I often say it's like, that's chaos, right? Overall, think of that as all the chaos in the world is the things that are happening that are almost out of our control. But if you can try to embrace the chaos, is what I like to consider to be, is embrace it and say, it is what it is. It's going to be there. How can I almost ride on top of that, or be a part of it and understand it, accept it, and see how I can make change through that chaos and make something positive come from it. Like the old saying, like, the most gifted leaders, they take obstacles and create opportunities. That's what we're looking for in these moments. And you mentioned AI. I think that's a very, very great example, because most people are initially like, I don't understand that. what do I do with this? And it's not where it needs to be. Well, the first thing is maybe I run away from it or I ignore it. But the reality is we need to run towards it and say, how do I use it? How do I understand it to the best of my ability so it becomes something I can use to my advantage and to be able to become even more effective. Yeah.
And what does it take to actually make this shift from running away from it to running towards it? Because I'm sure you've come across many, many people who are resistant to change and they say, we've always done it this way and this is the one and only proven way.
Yeah. Well, two things. Number one is, first of all, try to break it down. Because the first thing, when you think about it, it's too big of a thing. You can't get your arms around it. You can't get your head around it. So the first thing you have to do is make it smaller. What is it about this change that has you freaking out? What is it that you don't know that you want to know? And how can you break it into smaller problems, into things that are more digestible? And then once you do, how can you reframe it and see whether it's good or bad, or could be good or bad? And the more you can reframe the components of a potential change, the better you can deal with the path forward. You don't have to have all the steps mapped out, but you need to figure out, what do I want to do next that's going to help me get a little clearer on what to do as I move forward. If you become paralyzed by it, that's not going to help. But at the same time, you don't want to be making so many quick decisions that are not informed. So the best thing you can do is also to slow down a little bit and allow yourself to say, okay, what do I want to make of this? Yeah.
Absolutely. And also I like this approach that you break it down and also kind of, it enables you to classify it. So that might be a people issue, that might be a communications issue, that might be so-and-so. And then you can focus on what actually needs to change right here or right there. And it may require a different skill set or a different approach to it. And it's not as overwhelming as I would say, everything needs to change now.
Yeah.
That would be a bit
Yeah. I mean, you can't make good decisions in the panic. You can make great decisions in the calm. And when you slow things down, you give yourself the moment to be able to say, oh, maybe there's no decision to be made yet. Maybe I just need to learn more, understand more, talk to some people, figure out a little more information. There's no urgent decision to be made right now. I just need to figure out some more information through conversations.
And I think this is also especially useful to have a coach in those kind of situations who is not biased, who is very objective to the situation or the context, because often when we just talk to somebody who's so close to us, they're also emotionally invested in one way or the other. And they just pull the fire even further and we're not going anywhere.
Absolutely. It's like, like they said, the fish swimming in water, they don't know they're in water. Those people are swimming in the same water you are. And so therefore it's hard for them to see differently. So you bring someone in coming from a different perspective, a coach or advisor of some sort, who can be able to say, well, I'm not invested in here. What I'm invested in is helping you. And how can I help you? The best way I can help you is to allow you to see differently, so that you can have a different outcome than what you initially have, which is maybe being paralyzed.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of emotions, big part of people leadership is people and dealing with all of their uncertainties, their emotions. It's not just our own emotions that we have to control and navigate, but also others. Plus, we've got now 5 generations in the workforce with very different goals, aspirations, definitions of success. Not everyone wants to climb to the ladder, and often there is no ladder because the hierarchies are a lot flatter. What is the leadership of today and tomorrow dealing with all of those complexities?
Yeah, and I hope this doesn't annoy you too much. I'll just say that if you want to learn more about how to deal with all these different generations and how to figure out a path forward, the best you can do is to talk to them. Have conversations with a lot of different people, because what you want to know is what's driving them, what motivates people to want to get up and go to work. And when you start to understand from each generation what is really connecting them to the work, you can start to understand the bigger picture. If you start to get too myopic, where you say, I'm only focused on what Gen Z wants, or I'm only focused on what the millennials or what have you. And if I meet them, then I guess we'll at least get a good portion of the population. No, that's not going to work. We got to figure out, how can you meet people where they are, figure out what's most important to them, and find ways to, get a middle ground, or potentially even find ways to accommodate all groups in a way that's going to really drive the company forward. So
Mm. And,
um, I think the key
I
thing
think it
is
also,
connection.
absolutely. And that's just want to say a big part of your work is building those connections. And it starts obviously by knowing what drives people, what makes them get out of bed. But then the next question would be, it's a lot easier when people are in the same room or even in the same time zones. And now with having hybrid and distributed teams all over the world with different cultures and different time zones, how can we create this connection when we don't have this physical interaction?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has gotten harder for sure. Because when you're in that physical, the cooler talk, you can, meet at the water cooler and have conversations, build relationships. Because I think those connections are what makes people understand and build trust about each other, and understand what's their backstory, what makes them who they are. Because when you get to know people on that intimate level, a deeper level, then you can start to see the whole person, not just the person who is delivering the reports, or doing the end result of the work. And so the key thing is to do this very intentionally. When you're going to do this virtually or hybrid, or wherever, however this is going to come across, you can't just insert connection as part of like the day-to-day meetings. I mean, it can be part of it, but if you really want to create deeper connections, the best thing you can do is find ways for intentional connection, where this is dedicated space or time for us to create bonds, especially for generations where right now they never really experienced that in-person work the way we did, or like with the way even certain generations have. So I think it's important to say, hey, like, how are you building relationships? How can you get to know, what are the things that make you who you are? And what are some things that you do outside of work that make you unique and interesting? And how can we celebrate that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's finding this new way of doing it, because we can't look backwards. We have never had this situation before. And then, the next question comes from that. How can we ensure that, the core of the business or the essence of who we are as an organization isn't lost, but at the same time we're innovating. So stability, keeping things as we are, certainty, but at the same time, we don't want to be rolled over by AI or any other changes. We need to adapt and innovate. How do we find this balance?
Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned this, because I think there's a part of this which is the underlying theme for a lot of the things that we've been talking about is, we have to look back and understand what is the core of what got us started. What is our, if you think about business, you want to understand what were the flashpoints, as I call them, the points that have made us who we are. Maybe defining moments of the business, and what do we want to hold on to, because those things are part of our business DNA, and we don't want to lose them. That does not mean that we don't change. It just means that there's certain parts of us that are ingrained and we never want to change. And then we could change all the other things. We'd become a digital business, but at the core, our DNA is to serve customers in a certain way, or to deliver this for the people, whatever it may be. Understanding that origin story is so critical, just like it is for a leader to know your origin story. Why do I do what I do? Because when you do and you communicate that with other people, they see you, they understand you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, but I'm really curious for those who are preparing for maybe their first leadership role or for the next bigger leadership role. What's the best advice you would give them? How do we actually get ready for this next stage of our leadership career?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point is to understand, who are you as a leader? Who do you want to be as a leader? And I think that sometimes comes down to this identifying your leadership vision. what are the things that have the qualities that you want to embody as a leader? So if you're someone who's stepping into leadership for the first time, think back to the things that have made you who you are. What are your values? Who are the leaders that you've seen in the past who you've looked at and you said, my gosh, the way that they did this, it made me feel like I want to be like that. And the reason why that it lit them up is because it's a part of who they are, the very fabric of who they are. Could be a parent, it could be a famous person, or it could be someone maybe as the first boss. And however they carry themselves, that bleeds into how we show up. And when you embody that in your leadership vision and it becomes something you can remind yourself on a day-to-day basis, that's really a powerful way to set off on your course as a leader.
Absolutely. And I know you also just recently launched a new book as an additional resource that we can leverage. What is the essence of the book? Who is it for? And where can we get it?
Fantastic. Well, first of all, the book is called Campfire Lessons for Leaders: How Uncovering Your Past Can Propel You Forward. And it's a book that can be found everywhere, anywhere books are sold. But if you go to Amazon, you'll find it there for sure. And the book is, in essence, is these 10 key lessons that I've uncovered through interviewing over 200 people on my podcast, through these journeys that they've been on to becoming amazing people in the world. And they've been through some really challenging situations in their lives. But what these lessons really uncover is how to connect with your own story. So when we connect with our narrative, we can connect better with ourselves and understand ourselves, and then we can connect better with others. And so I think that's at the core theme of what this book's about is how do we understand ourselves better so we can understand others.
Love it. And speaking of connection, where can we connect with you, learn more about you, and stay in touch?
Absolutely. Best place is to go to my website, which is ipurposepartners.com. And the I is the letter I, not I. And the other place is is on LinkedIn. I'm Tony Martignetti with a 1 at the end instead of I. I got to be a little complicated here.
Of course. That what makes you unique.
Yes. But yeah, if you go to those places, especially my website, you'll find links to my podcast, my books, as well as a bunch of great assessments that I offer to my people. So
beautiful. Well, we'll definitely put all the links in the show notes for everyone to check out, because I think it's such an important skill and mindset to foster in this day and age. So thank you so much for your work and for sharing all your wisdom today with us.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.